Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Became the Guardian of All Creation Part 3. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Naruto's slumbering form awoke at 7:53 a.m., displacing the plush doll that had been snuggled on top of his head. He caught the doll before it flew too far across the room, saving the poor fox from slamming into a wall, and gave it a few scratches between the ears before placing it on his pillow as he went about getting ready for a new day. After the incident yesterday, Kakashi gave the team 3 days off with his newly formed fan club. He had stated that he needed to lay low for a while, but had graciously invited Sasuke to come by his house to train when he thought Naruto wasn't paying attention. That almost made the black mage snort. I have to give him a grudging respect. He can lie about teamwork right in front of my face without flinching. I'll have to kill him if he starts chucking kunai at the back of my head in an attempt to accidentally kill me while aiming to improve my reflexes. He shrugged a little and picked up the slowly awakening plush toy, protectively cradling it in his left arm as he walked out of the house. He'd decided to see the other two teams that graduated with him when he wasn't in one of his gloriously sappy optimistic moods. This day had an 89% chance of being completely worthless, with an 11% chance of getting to defend himself against his comrades if they tried to attack him. Joy. He was already prepared to spork someone's eye out. 8:05 a.m., Training Ground 21. Naruto remembered hearing somewhere around the village that Team 8, led by Genjutsu Mistress Yuyuhi Kurenai, always met at Training Ground 21 at 8 a.m., and he resolved to meet his comrades. He told the Kyuubi doll about his plans for the day after it had fully awoken, complete with a squeaky yawn. The doll had laughed at him, having to stifle the sound in the teen's shirt, before telling him that he must have been high when he made this decision. Naruto shrugged and replied to the doll before proceeding to the training grounds. If they attack me, I can legally claim I was defending myself and use almost lethal force if necessary. It's a win-win situation in either case. The doll paused for a moment, tapping its chin with a stuffed paw before nodding, a feral grin on its face. It stiffened before returning to his arms motionless, though a murmur of "I want to attack that mutt's dog if he tries anything" could be heard. Naruto had arrived at the training grounds and was walking noisily towards where the team was training, not wanting to go unnoticed. When he stepped out of the tree line, the doll had to bite its lip to keep from bursting out laughing, scaring all three of the genin. But the jounin was noticeably calm about it. So much for scouting and surveillance teams. Naruto only gave Kurenai a half-hearted wave and explained why he was there before Kiba could come up with an excuse to attack him. "Hello, Kurenai-san. My teacher is indisposed for the next 3 days due to a spontaneous fan club, but that doesn't stop him from training the great Uchiha-sama. I was wondering if I could observe how your team works, as mine is quite abysmal when it comes to teamwork." The four of them blinked quickly in surprise, as the three genin had expected him to attack first, and the jounin didn't think he'd be all that polite. Kiba, being the tactical genius that he was, chose to respond before thinking. "You just want to steal all our secrets and kill us in our sleep, demon." The black mage cast an unsettling glance at the Inuzuka, freezing him in place with a tiny spike of killing intent. His voice was emotionless, but it had an unsettling edge to it. "I am speaking with your teacher, Inuzuka-san. If I wanted to steal all of your secrets, I would need my teacher's sharingen, wouldn't I?" While Kurenai was trying to figure out if there was a hidden meaning within his declaration, the dog using Nin took about 14 seconds to respond. She was about to respond when Kiba interrupted her. "The sharingen is one of Konoha's best bloodlines. How dare you mock it, demon? Hakamaru, attack." The wolf-sized dog companion paused for a beat before charging at Naruto, his teeth bared. Naruto sighed softly, a light purple energy beginning to leak from him as he raised one hand in the air. Shino and Hinata were taken aback because it didn't feel like chakra at all. The energy twisted and twined around both of his arms before disappearing with the sound of a single word. Quake. The ground beneath the charging dog turned liquid, engulfing the white-furred companion up to his neck in the substance before hardening back to normal. The dog whimpered in its confined space, unable to move until it was freed from the earth. Kiba was puzzled for a moment before his temper flared. "What the hell did you do to him, you monster?" The monster in question simply rolled his purple eyes and returned his gaze to Kurenai. "Perhaps I should leave, Kurenai-san. If your student continues to attack me, I will be authorized to use any means necessary to stop him, except killing him, though. I believe I could do something just as good." The three genin stiffened in fear at his words, wondering what horrors the demon could conjure up. Kurenai blinked quickly in surprise before nodding and responding. It's probably best. Kiba is quite rash, and I don't have complete control over my own students. But it was good to see you, Naruto-san. Naruto simply nodded before returning his attention to the trapped dog. The lavender energy resurfaced, sparkling a little in the morning air as the dog was lifted free of the ground, despite the fact that it had a liberal dusting of soil on its fur. The black mage turned away and began to walk away, prompting Kiba to try to take advantage of the situation. The dog then advanced, performing a few hand seals before leaping into the air. Suuga, don't turn your back on me. Kiba spun in a horizontal tornado of dust and air, transforming the technique into a grinding drill. He was almost to Naruto's back when the teen turned around and threw him into a tree. The annoyance in his amethyst eyes surprised him because he was expecting pure malice. With a single word, the violet aura seeped back into his skin, feeling strangely poisonous. Bio, a thick green mass of goo formed in the air, surrounding and covering the dog nin from head to toe. Kiba held his breath, unsure what the stuff did, but let out a choking gasp as it covered every inch of his skin, slipping under his clothing to do so. Before the gelatinous mass vanished into thin air, he felt a burning pain cover him from head to toe, similar to sunburn. When he tried to stand up, he discovered that his muscles weren't working and that an intense spike of pain racked his body when he moved. He yelped in pain as he tried again, only to have the pain multiply. Kurenai rushed over to check on her student, but when she gently prodded his shoulder, he whimpered again. She asked a question to Naruto, who looked quite amused. What exactly did you do? Naruto shrugged, placing the Kyuubi doll on top of his head in an exaggerated thinking pose. I used the gelatinous mass as a medium, delivering a cocktail of poisons to his system. He currently has all of his muscles paralyzed, except for the vital ones, and every single movement or touch upon his person causes intense pain. It also has no antidote, as of yet. I could remove the poison if I wanted, but I told you, if he attacked me, I would find something to do to him. He teleported into a shunshin, what appeared to be frozen flower petals flinging around him in a flurry, shattering all at once in a beautiful tinkling noise. The Hokage's office. Sarutobi was having a rough day. He arrived at 7 a.m. to discover that he had more paperwork than he had left the night before. He then got a paper cut while working on it. He had to fight the urge to blast the stacks of paper with a fire jutsu, because that paper cut could have been lethal, and misinterpreted as an assassination attempt. He was about halfway through one of the stacks at this point, and he was feeling pretty good about himself. He detected the telltale signs of a shunshin and ensured that none of the stacks were blown over by smoke or leaves as he waited for the person to appear. Imagine his surprise when Naruto appeared in a whirlwind of frozen flower petals, looking exactly like him. His hair was pulled back in a high ponytail. If he had asked the Kyuubi doll about it, he would have received the response, "It doesn't look as cool when your hair is always billowing out behind you as you walk. You must distinguish between days when your hair is intimidating and days when it is pulled back." One has to wonder how the great Kyuubi no Kitsune comes up with such hair-related ideas. Naruto was the first to break the silence, his lips quirking into an amused grin. Hokage-san, if the Inuzuka clan head wants to execute me for attacking her son, please remind her that he tried to use Suuga on me when I had my back turned. He'll be fine in about a week, though I suppose you could have medic nins try to extract the poison. It'd be quite a challenge, I assure you. Perhaps they could take it as training. Sarutobi let out a tired sigh before nodding. He took out his pipe and began to puff it lazily as he pondered the situation in his mind. What exactly did you use to poison him, Naruto-kun? The blonde's eyes twinkled with innocence, but there was a lot of sadness in them. Just a cocktail of my own specially created poisons. He can't move, and if he tries or anyone touches him, it causes him intense pain. Very intense pain. He's lucky I let him live for attacking me while my back was turned like that. But I think the council would try to do something to me if I killed a clan heir. Unfortunately, I need to train, so I don't have time to put them back in their place. The Sandaime nodded slightly, continuing to smoke his pipe while he thought about it. He sighed heavily as something came to him. Naruto-kun, why were you near teammate in the first place? The blonde teen snickered slightly and thoughtfully tapped his chin. You know, I had this crazy idea that I should get to know my comrades better, so I went to teammates' training ground. I made sure not to use a teleportation technique, and was walking quite noisily through the forest so that I basically broadcast my position. And the only one who noticed was Kurenai-san. I asked her if I could see how a real team interacts, since Hatake-san is quite hypocritical. The Hokage nodded, clearly seeing the Inuzuka heir as bold enough to attack without provocation. However, something in the narration piqued his interest and prompted him to bring it up. "Are you saying Kakashi-kun is hypocritical?" As he replied, the blonde's lips twisted from a smirk to a slight sneer, and his voice had a poisonous edge to it. "He constantly rambles about teamwork, tries to get us to do teamwork exercises, and claims nonsense about those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their teammates are worse than trash." Of course, right after saying that, he ignores both Haruno-san and I, and privately trains the Uchiha when he thinks no one is looking. The claim surprised the Hokage, who pulled out his crystal ball and zeroed in on Kakashi's chakra signature. To his surprise, he was in his backyard, showing Sasuke a new technique and instructing him to replicate it with the Sharingan. As he watched the Uchiha air fumble at copying the technique, the purple-eyed teen sighed. Hadake-san told us that the team would be taking 3 days off, and then pulled the Uchiha to the side to offer private training. I'm sure his sensei would be rolling over in his grave by now, if he wasn't already due to the treatment of the precious Jinchuriki. The last 2 words were so sarcastic that the Hokage swears some of the paperwork combusted from the statement. He raised his head from the crystal ball, a slightly puzzled expression on his face. Yondame's team was taught that teamwork was everything. How could he have sunk so low? The blonde nearly snorted in disbelief before responding angrily. Perhaps it's the bribery or the prestige that comes with teaching the wonderful Uchiha-sama. If he focuses a bit, I'm sure he could break Haruno-san of her fangirl tendencies. But that would take effort, which is blasphemous in his mind. So, he uses his implanted thieving eye to steal techniques, and then to teach the stolen techniques to the Uchiha. The blonde vanished in a hail of ice needles, demonstrating that he could turn teleportation into an offensive gesture, when the needles flew through the air and vanished just as they were about to impale the dreaded paperwork. 10 AM Training Ground. Naruto appeared in a tree above Team 10, the branch below him frosty from the ice elemental Shunshin before evaporating. He leaned against the trunk, unsure how to approach Sarutobi Asuma, the Sandame's son, without appearing hostile. He was too preoccupied with his thoughts to notice a shadow creeping up the trunk and latching onto his shadow. He blinked, startled, before remembering that the Nara clan employs shadow techniques. He sighed softly, wondering when the Nara would emerge from hiding. Shikamaru, Genin's pineapple hairstyle, walked out of the foliage beneath the tree and looked at him suspiciously after about 10 seconds. He, too, had heard of the demon child, but he wasn't a genius for nothing. He could tell there was something fishy about that story and decided to reserve judgment until he got to know the flaxen-haired teen a little better. He couldn't be as bad as the stories suggested, could he? He spoke up because he noticed the blonde didn't seem surprised at all. "What brings you here?" He could feel the black mage's smirk coming from him, and it made him nervous. He shouldn't be able to get away from the cage man. Unfortunately, that thought was dashed when the blonde in the branches vanished into thin air, only to reappear right next to him, his lips twitching with amusement. His voice lacked emotion and revealed nothing about his thoughts. "I came here to speak with your teacher about something, but I have to commend you on catching me off guard with that technique. Not many people can do that." Shikamaru nodded slightly, still suspicious of the behavior displayed. Before he could ask how he got out of the shadow technique, a piercing scream of shikamaru came from a nearby clearing, causing Naruto to clutch his ears in pain. The blonde looked at him in disbelief, and even the fox doll on his head appeared to be shaken by the noise. "How do you put up with that every day?" "I think she's worse than Haruno-san." Shikamaru shrugged and took some earplugs out of his ears. His response almost made Naruto snicker at the genius. "I read lips and muffle sounds." After replacing the earplugs, the shadow manipulator led the blonde to where his team was currently training. Naruto had to deal with the shriek of "what's he doing here?" as they both walked out of the foliage. The black mage had to forcefully suppress the urge to try to emulate the needle trick Haku used, thinking it wouldn't look good if he attacked the banshee without a better reason. "Thanch makes my ears bleed." Naruto replied with a shrug of his shoulders and a nod towards the bearded Jounin, having finally gotten the ringing sensation out of his ears. "I needed to talk to Asuma-san, Yamanaka-san." Ino and Chaoji were immediately suspicious, both having a strong dislike for the golden-haired Genin. Shikamaru hadn't told anyone else about his suspicions that the demon child stories were propaganda for fear of being shunned. The trench knife Jounin, Sarutobi Asuma, looked surprised by the declaration, though he had no ill will toward the black mage. His father had told him that, while the teen was brutal and sadistic, he was quite polite until he was enraged. Ino was about to scream at the demon brat who wanted to speak with her teacher when an ice needle struck her in the side of the neck. It wasn't enough to put her in a near-death state, but it did keep her from speaking. Chaoji and Shikamaru tensed as the attack began, But Naruto quickly calmed them down and caused Asuma to stifle a snicker. Her voice is causing me more pain than most physical wounds, and I feel it is an attack on my person. She will be silent for about 10 minutes after the needle is removed, and no harm has come to her other than the lack of speech. I apologize, Asuma-san, as my true intention for coming here was to speak to you, not to silence your banshee student. Asuma nodded to the teen before posing the question on everyone's lips. What did you want to discuss with me? As he replied, the blonde non-lips banshees quirked slightly and his eyes glinted with mischief. I actually wanted to see how a real team interacts. Hadake-san, while decent in combat, shows quite a bit of favoritism to the Uchiha, preferring to train him over just about anything else. I believe he was trying to have me killed when he set me up to fight against Momochi's Abusa in our C-rank mission. But I digress. I had heard much about this supposed teamwork from his ravings while he pandered. By the time Naruto finished his heavily sarcastic monologue, Asuma was in fits of laughter. He regained control of himself while Shikamaru was in his thinking pose and Choji was eating chips. Ino was waiting for the needle's acoustic effects to wear off after pulling it out while the golden-haired teen was speaking. He was finally able to respond, putting an end to his amusement at the situation. Alright, I suppose. I can let you watch our team train so you can see for yourself that teamwork is a great concept. But I wanted to ask you something I saw in the Jounin meeting yesterday, as well as just now with Ino. How do you use the element of ice? And without hand seals, no less. The boy rummaged through his pockets for a while, his tongue sticking out the side of his mouth as he looked for something. He finally took out a note card with his prepared speech about how I do things written on it and read it aloud. It's a bloodline thing. He quickly tucked the card away, appearing completely innocent. The doll on his head began to wiggle a little, but only Asuma noticed. The bearded Jounin politely nodded to the golden-haired teen, allowing him to observe his team's teamwork tactics and drills, which capitalized on the different abilities of the Akamichi, Yamanaka, and Nara clans. Shikamaru would capture something with his cage mate, and Choji would flatten it with his Nikyuden Senshi using his Beika no Jutsu. Alternatively, Shikamaru would capture a target and Ino would possess it using her Shintenshin no Jutsu. They worked on more fluidly blending their abilities, as well as training Choji to be able to steer his Nikyuden Senshi more accurately. Shikamaru had to practice extending his shadow further with fewer shadows nearby to work with, while Ino had to work on the speed of her soul as it shot out of her body to possess the target. Asuma then made his team work on their taijutsu, noticing that Ino and Shikamaru were lacking in this area. Naruto had offered to give them some incentive to be enthusiastic about it, and had summoned a few ice needles and viciously sharpened ice sporks from the air to demonstrate his point. Needless to say, the taijutsu training was the best the two had in ages, though they were constantly on the lookout for the enigmatic blonde. Naruto noticed that something was missing from their repertoire and inquired of Asuma as to why they hadn't yet learned any elemental jutsu. The Jounin scratched one of his sideburns, nervously laughing as he replied, I never got around to finding out their affinities. The blonde snickered a little before politely reminding him that their academy techniques and single clan jutsu would only get them so far, and that they should be able to have at least one defensive elemental technique in case they were confronted with someone using offensive elemental techniques. He even built a miniature battlefield with golems resembling Ino, Choji, and Shikamaru, as well as one unknown nin, and demonstrated both scenarios. Before sending his team into target practice, the Jounin had nodded, clearly impressed by the tactical advantages that ability would provide. As ice crystals formed in the air around him, Naruto was meditating while watching the projectiles take off. As the crystals grew in number, the air began to sparkle from them, eventually combining to form a flawless multifaceted prism in front of the black mage. The prism, about the size of a human, hung in the air, humming slightly from the energy within it. Naruto had a flash of brilliance and stepped forward to the prism, placing a hand on it and focusing intently on something. If he recalls correctly, Haku could appear to melt into the ice and move at high speeds from mirror to mirror, almost like a toned-down Shunshin at will. As Ino gasped in surprise, Team 10 came to a halt. They all turned to the direction she was pointing and watched as Naruto merged into the prism, his reflection appearing on every facet of the ice. Before the prism shattered, each facet of the boy appeared oddly contemplative in each of the reflections. Soon, the clearing was surrounded by ice fragment reflections of Naruto, each with a Kyuubi doll perched on their shoulders. His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time as he laughed. I think I figured out the Makaio Hayasho, but it's quite unsettling to see from every angle. The fragments shattered one by one until there was only one mirror left, and Naruto took a step outwards from it, appearing to melt out of the surface before the final mirror shattered as well. He appeared tired from the manipulation, but his lips quirked up in a slight smirk as he scratched the side of his cheek. Sorry for the interruption. I remembered a friend of mine who was able to do that and wanted to see if I could replicate it. I'm still not good enough with my ice manipulation to do it as well as she was, though, so I need to go train. A large ice mirror formed from the thin air, and Naruto melted into it before it vanished, sublimating into the air from which it formed. Team 10 was taken aback by the boy's command, and Shikamaru mulled over these thoughts in his head. He should probably talk to the golden-haired teen privately one of these days to get the full story. Could they possibly play Shogi or Go? 11 a.m. Training Ground 44, Forest of Death. A thin sheet of ice formed in the air, allowing a blonde teen to step through it before it evaporated back into the atmosphere. Naruto lightly shook himself to get rid of the strange sensation of being trapped within a mirror, and spread his senses outward to ensure that his training was not disrupted. He couldn't feel the presence of anyone nearby, so he sat against the trunk of a tree and fell into a meditative trance. Feeling around in the flow of mana within him for the various strands of each element, he discovered one with a slight kiss of winter imbued within it. He gently yanked it free of the rest and began weaving it in a precise pattern, much like a tapestry. The light blue thread of magic spun at an almost inhuman speed in his mind's eye as it surged through the mana construct for a new spell he had devised. He destroyed the construct after completing it once and forced the power through it again and again. He kept weaving until he got a splitting headache from it, which drew him away from his work to distract himself from the pain. Unconsciously, his lips twitched upwards in a slight smile as thoughts meandered through his mind, catching parts of one or two before they vanished. One fully formed memory occurred to him, causing his smile to widen slightly. Flashback. Haku leaned in close to his ear, her soft voice whispering lightly as she passed on her ice manipulation tip, causing the black mage to stiffen before thanking her with a heartfelt hug. To truly manipulate the element of ice, remember that the water is the raw material, and the wind is the hammer and chisel, molding and shaping it to your whim. Finish the flashback. His headache had finally stopped pounding within his skull, allowing him to lean back and relax while weaving his ice spells over and over. He would give the element some leeway on its own, allowing it to sculpt itself to a point, but he would not let it off the leash. It may wish to shape itself, but he required it to function in a specific manner. He would let the element do whatever it wanted as long as he got most of the molding done, as he only needed so much to ensure the spell worked properly. As he continued to practice his ice manipulation, the air around him glittered and whirled, creating a beautiful sight that only Naruto could see. He continued to play with the element throughout the day and most of the night, trying to find the most efficient way to manipulate it before returning to his living quarters, determined to sleep in his soft bed. 3 weeks later, at 8:30 a.m., his ice manipulation training was going swimmingly. It was still a little behind his other elements, but he didn't mind. The element was an interesting one to work with because almost all of the spells he could think of were offensive in nature. He would use earth instead of fragile ice if he was working on a defensive black magic spell. He pushed those thoughts aside for the time being as he walked steadily down one of Konoha's streets. His thoughts returned to his memory, forcing him to recall a few of the training sessions with his team. He had to deal with Kakashi's malevolent glare almost all the time, and he was almost certain the man was training Sasuke to assassinate him. He really didn't mind because his words still rang true. He was stronger than Kakashi, so he didn't care how the man trained the Uchiha, because the Uchiha would only become as powerful as Kakashi. That would be false if Sasuke ever tried to do something original or something other than copying. But, no, he wasn't wise enough to realize that true power comes from hard work, not genetic advantages. He remembered one particular day when he had met Shikamaru and played Shogi against the Shadow User. He had lost, but he didn't mind all that much. The brunette was a tactical genius, thinking far ahead of his surroundings. Furthermore, the majority of his thoughts were focused on the rumors about him during their conversation in the safety of Naruto's apartment. Some of the embellishments, such as how he ate people alive or how he had 9 hidden foxtails proving that he was the Kyuubi, made him snicker. The game had ended on a slightly better note, though Naruto remained unimpressed with the Shadow User. Who cares if he shifted one person's viewpoint from bias to neutral? The majority of the villagers were too stupid to notice or care, and they continued their witch hunt for the demon child. He's lucky they couldn't find his apartment, or he'd have to do something drastic. He pushed those thoughts aside, thinking about buying a stainless steel spork weapon for his doll, because claws, tails, nails, and fangs only get you so far, and that spork will get you even further. The image of a plush doll wielding an eating utensil made the doll snicker. Naruto reasoned that it would make him appear more harmless, so that when someone ignored him, the real havoc could begin. The ability to hold the spork, on the other hand, would alert the enemies to the fact that the doll could move, effectively discrediting his idea. His thoughts returned to another recollection from the previous 3 weeks, when he had spent time with Guy at the Jounen's apartment. Naruto had gone into great detail about how to train in his hand-to-hand combat style. He warned Guy not to show the council any of his notes, as their one-track mind would almost certainly force all children under the age of 6 to go through the training. While having an army of highly evasive shinobi seemed appealing on paper, having only one style in an entire village would severely limit the variety. Aside from that, if all the ninjas in Konoha followed the same style, everyone would know what to expect and could prepare accordingly. Of course, none of the council would consider that. Instead, they'd think impressive taijutsu style, ancient, and very powerful before jumping to the conclusion off mass produce. When the spandex-clad Jounin finally left his apartment, he had over 20 pages of notes on how to train in the style. Naruto had agreed to draw diagrams for the katas in the style because Guy would need them in the manual as well. Guy was too old to train in the style properly because his body was fully formed and wouldn't respond well to the intense flexibility training. They both agreed that only children deemed worthy of the style would be taught it, and that only one child would be taught at a time. It would be inappropriate to devote an entire class to the style. Naruto devised the term Mato Clan secret style to ensure that only Guy could pass it on. When asked why Naruto didn't want it to be his clan's style, the Black Mage simply said, "Do you think the council would believe me?" Guy had to admit that it was possible they'd vote against it and have him teach it to Sasuke. Of course, that would result in unnecessary deaths, and Naruto was too preoccupied with training to deal with genocide. As Naruto continued walking aimlessly around the village, he heard a child in a nearby alleyway yelp in pain. He quickly changed course, heading in the direction of the sound, and had to stifle a snicker as he heard "Oi, that stung, brat." He turned the corner into the alleyway, noticing 2 Suna genin staring at a child no older than 8, who appeared to be the Hokage's grandson. Suna genin, a male dressed in a black jumpsuit with what appeared to be cat ears on the hood, was holding the child by the collar of his shirt. A bandaged package was also strapped to his back. Suna genin was dressed in a thigh-length battle kimono with short sleeves and a battle fan strapped across her back. Naruto noticed something strange in the air and used his senses to figure out what it was. He sensed demonic energy emanating from a nearby tree, as well as an aura of malice and bloodthirst. The Kyuubi doll perched on his shoulder had quickly whispered in his ear, "Ikabai no tanuki, sabaku no shukaku." The blonde teen yawned slightly before turning to face the male Suna genin who was clutching Konohamaru. His voice was quite unsettling to the two, as it sounded far too much like their younger brothers. "While I have no affection for this village, I must warn you that you are currently guarding the Hokage's grandson, and any threat to him may spark a war." The young man in the black jumpsuit quickly dropped the child, stepping back in slight fear that he was about to beat up a Hokage relative. The child dashed out of the alleyway, tears streaming down his cheeks as he escaped danger. Naruto sighed, turning to exit the alleyway, his blonde hair billowing behind him as he strode away from the Suna genin. A monotone voice called out behind him before he could take his 5th step, the indifferent tone barely concealing true intentions. "Who exactly are you?" Naruto had slowly turned to face the red-headed genin wearing a rather heavy gourd on his back, his clothing looking a bit loose and baggy on him, seeing an opportunity to possibly perk up his absurdly boring day. "My name is Naruto, but if your Biju wasn't a psychotic sand monster, he would have told you something else. Farewell, Jinchuriki of the Ikabai no Tanuki, Sabaku no Shukaku." He vanished in a swirl of snowflakes before waiting for a response from the stunned trio. Naruto's residence. Naruto sat in the lotus position to begin his ice training, deciding that he would have to train inside for the next week to avoid unnecessary confrontations with insane Jinchurikis. Should dolls be able to choke? The doll on his shoulder was nearly choking with laughter. Kyuubi apparently held a grudge against the Tanuki, as the sand demon was never in the right frame of mind. The teen entered a deep state of meditation, certain that no intruder would be able to interrupt. He began his newest project, creating a version of Haku's Makaio Hyosho, careful not to appear to have simply ripped off the technique. He intended to take the fundamentals of the ability, namely melting into something made of ice, surrounding the enemy, and attacking from all sides while you cannot be attacked until all of the ice constructs are shattered, and create something unique out of it. For the rest of the week, he bounced ideas off the Kyuubi, running scenarios through his head every now and then as he tried to perfect the technique mentally, he began working on bringing it from theory to reality about 3 days before the Chunin exams. He lay in deep meditation for 2 days, finally waking up at 11:49 p.m. the day before the exams. He climbed into his bed, murmuring a soft goodnight to the doll nearby as he fell asleep. 7:30 a.m. the next day, he awoke to the sound of an alarm clock, smashing the evil contraption almost unconsciously as he went about his daily hygiene routine. The doll appeared sleepy as he returned to his bedroom, fully clothed, though his hair was still wet. He gently picked up the doll and cradled it in his arms, snickering softly as the doll rubbed his eyes in a very human-like gesture. On his way to the academy for the first part of the exams, his mind raced with ideas about what the various parts would be. He knew the first part was a paper test, the second was a survival test, and the third was a tournament. He nearly groaned in frustration, fully aware that he would fail that damn paper test because he had never studied. He was a hands-on learner who detested shinobi history in general. It was far too erroneous. Other histories, such as art history, ninjutsu history, spork history, and so on, were fine because they were mostly accurate. Historians must be damned for rewriting history in favor of the winners. As he approached the front door, he pushed homicidal thoughts towards evil civilians in libraries further back in his mind. He sat down against a tree trunk, deciding to wait for his teammates. He would not be holding back whatever happened during these exams. When Sasuke arrived at the academy around 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the exams were scheduled to begin, he witnessed something extremely rare. Sakura wasn't just hanging off his arm like a leech ... His teammate, on the other hand, was lounging on top of a tree branch, back to the trunk, and was singing a song. When Naruto's mana supply ran out while training with Lulu, he had to find something to do. He'd decided that he needed a hobby that didn't cost much money, could occupy hours of his time, and was sufficiently rewarding. When he mentioned it to Lulu, she said that music had all of those circumstances met, and she suggested that he start playing an instrument. He'd started when he was 5 years old, and it had become a soothing experience for him to play a lap harp whenever he was bored or wasn't training. His fingers had been itching to play the instrument for months since his return to Konoha, but due to his numerous clashes with villagers and ninja, as well as his training in the elements, he had put it on the back burner. But now, he was lounging, his eyes closed, as his fingers plucked out a song on the lap harp he carried with him, sealed within a small scroll that he carried with him at all times. It was sealed with a blood seal, so it could only be released by him or his family. As he continued to play, Sasuke came to a halt, staring open-mouthed at his enigmatic blonde teammate. Sakura approached him and was about to ask him out on a date when the song's tones reached her ears as well, and she looked up to see where it came from. She nearly fainted in shock when she discovered the source. The two genin almost simultaneously tried to release a genjutsu, believing that their teammate couldn't possibly do anything other than fight. Meanwhile, Naruto was feeling more relaxed and less hostile now that he could finally play his lap harp and was aware of his two teammates. He gave the mental equivalent of a shrug, unconcerned that they had discovered his hobby, and continued to play. The song he was playing was strange, and only the doll perched on his head or he himself would know why he was playing it. The two onlookers, as well as several ninja hidden nearby who had come to find out where the music came from, were taken aback by the sadness in the flowing music. He was currently performing a dirge in memory of Lulu. His thoughts had been strangely preoccupied with the passing of his mentor, older sister, mother figure that morning, and he decided that he should honor her departure to the far plane. His fingers plucked at the strings with masterful ease, using mana to change the flatness or sharpness of a specific string in order to avoid the use of levers. As he continued his song, all sounds seemed to stop around him, until he finished it and stored the lap harp within the small scroll with a small puff of smoke. As he looked down at his teammates with a quirked eyebrow, he tucked the scroll into a hidden pocket within his shirt. "Do you want to go?" Both had to physically shake themselves out of their trance, immediately shoving that memory deep into the denial section of their brains, unable to believe that their demon teammate was capable of emotion. Sasuke quickly regained his air of Uchiha, also known as arrogant prick aura, causing many Konoha citizens to consider bowing before him. As soon as the aura was placed, Sakura latched onto Sasuke, staring up at him with starry eyes, while the ninja in the surrounding foliage vanished, satisfied that there was no threat. Two of the observers, Kurenai and Anko, filed the memory of Naruto playing a dirge into a mental folder labeled Investigate Later. The blonde hopped down the tree branch, the plush doll on his head falling into his arms. He led the team into the academy without another word. 8:40 a.m., Academy, 2nd floor. Naruto's senses detected a slight disturbance as soon as he set foot on the floor. He looked around the corridor, waiting for Sasuke and Sakura to appear. Sasuke had taken extra time ascending the staircase to wait as people bowed down in his wake, and Sakura had apparently been winded from ascending a single flight of stairs. The source of the noise was found at the doorway to what appeared to be room 301, though the 3 was flickering in his vision. He concluded that it had to be an illusion, which was exacerbated by the large crowd of Chunin hopefuls gathered around the door, which was guarded by 2 Chunin using another genjutsu to disguise themselves as jounin. The 2 were attempting to keep the teenagers away from the door by acting as if it were the real 301. The blonde sighed, moving across the floor away from the commotion and up another flight of stairs, because 301 was on the 3rd floor, not the 2nd. You'd think that people could think for themselves, but they can't. They see a group of Chunin hopefuls attempting to enter a door on the 2nd floor and immediately assume that this is the door for the first exam, despite the fact that it was specifically stated to be on the 3rd floor. He looked down at the fox plush in his arms, who also appeared to be tired of human stupidity. He murmured softly, just loud enough for the fox to hear, but unheard by anyone else. "They make me feel ashamed that I am of their race." The fox looked up at him, surprised, before responding with a feral grin, stiffening again so that no one would suspect him of moving. "I think of you as more of a demon than anything else, despite the fact that you are mortal like them." As he walked past his teacher, the black mage made sure to give the plush toy extra belly rubs, completely disregarding his ramblings about how it was a team exam and he had to wait for his teammates. 8:55 a.m., room 301. Naruto had taken a seat in the midst of the Chunin aspirants, and was currently tapping his finger on the top of his desk as he waited for his teammates to arrive. If Sasuke almost didn't get it, Kakashi would either reveal the secret to the Uchiha or pull strings to allow him to continue. He finally got up from his seat and walked towards the entryway, where the majority of the Rookie 9, as they were known, gathered. He completely ignored Kiba's horrified recoil, who had recovered in the hospital following his attack, and went in search of the pink hair that was characteristic of a Haruno. When he finally found them, he let out an annoyed sigh when he saw Sasuke, who was looking a little worse for wear. "Are you correct that you fought Lee?" The Uchiha simply glared back, though the bruises responded in their own unique way, almost like imprints of the boy's sandals. The blonde simply shrugged, turning on his heel and returning to his seat. He was stopped, however, by another genin who stood in his way. He appeared to be about 5'8", with gray hair pulled back into a ponytail, purple battle gear, and round glasses on the bridge of his nose. However, when Naruto examined him more closely, the genin seemed to have a latent malice hidden within his warm gaze, and his demeanor simply dripped with deceit. He listened to what the genin had to say with a mental shrug, not really caring. "Hey, you guys know you're attracting a lot of attention, right?" Naruto peered over the boy's shoulder and saw that most of the room was glaring in their direction with a small amount of killing intent. His lip twitched slightly at that, wanting nothing more than to kill them before squelching that desire. He responded with an apathetic shrug to the gray-haired genin. "What is your point? I just had to keep an eye on my comrades to make sure they didn't do anything stupid and get disqualified. If you don't mind, I'll return to my seat." The genin looked at him, seemingly assessing him. Before nodding, he was about to move when he remembered something and pulled out a deck of cards, his eyes sparkling with manipulative glee and a hint of mockery within. "My name is Yakashi Kabuto, and I'm one of the exam's senior applicants. Do you want to look at my nin info cards? I have information on nearly everyone in this exam, regardless of country." He wasn't expecting the response he got. "There isn't a single human in this village who would present me with a decent challenge. The Sandaime is simply too old to fight, and many of the Jounin could easily be taunted into giving up any advantage they had in the first place. Move over or you'll be eliminated." Kabuto moved out of the way, surprised by the response, before returning to the shell-shocked genin, deck of cards in hand. "How about the rest of you?" Naruto's keen hearing picked up on Sasuke's confident response, nearly causing him to snort in mockery. Naruto and Rock Lee. The medic nin shuffled through the cards before pulling out the 2 requested, and gave a passable grin, though Naruto could sense the genin's disgust and annoyance. Konoha's Rock Lee specializes in taijutsu. Due to his inability to use chakra, he has no ability in ninjutsu or genjutsu. Mission history includes 38 D ranks and 7 degrees Celsius ranks. His taijutsu abilities appear to be matched only by his teammate Hyuga Neji and his mentor, Mato guy. Sasuke's lips twisted into a smug sneer at this, ushering the medic onto the next. Naruto appeared next to Kabuto, holding the card with his information on it, quickly scanning its contents, much to the chagrin of the genin, before giving a humorless laugh. Kabuto-san, your information on me is very hazy, and it even misspells my name. Let me fix it for you. The card seemed to pulse with a light purple energy before the information rewrote itself. Much to the medic's surprise, nobody should have been able to change the information. He examined the card after it was returned to him, gasping in shock as the blonde returned to his seat to listen. I can't believe it. Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, age 15, is the former Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. He is the sole descendant of Konoha's yondaime, Namikaze Minato, and his wife, Uzumaki Kushina from Whirlpool Country, was presumed dead at the age of 3 after being captured and beaten to submission by a mob due to his Jinchuriki status, and was abandoned outside Konoha. He was taught taijutsu by an unknown woman in his bloodline, as well as an ancient taijutsu style. With a few exceptions, bloodline is primarily the use of highly advanced elemental manipulation without the use of hand seals. Because of his bloodline, he doesn't use chakra at all, so the Hyuga taijutsu has no effect on him. His ninjutsu is far superior to that of a Kage, and he is on par with most jounin in hand-to-hand combat. His genjutsu is unknown because he does not use illusion techniques at all, despite the fact that his control indicates that he is perfectly capable of doing so. He has been reported to have killed over 300 mercenaries in one technique, and he, like the Kyuubi, can create tidal waves and earthquakes with a flick of his wrist. The Kyuubi is no longer imprisoned within him because the Shikifuin is no longer present on his body. He has a mission history of 48 D ranks and 1 degrees Celsius turned a rank mission where he fought on par with Mamachi Zabuza and battled the Nuke Nin into submission in a purely water-based fight. Many of the Konoha genin turned their heads so quickly to face the blonde in question that their necks cracked, and a few nearly snapped their own necks in the whiplash of the movement, and Kabuto was barely able to restrain his instinct to start sweating buckets at the information, as he was unsure if Orochimaru would even be able to fight this one. Naruto was simply tapping his fingers on the desk in a bored rhythm, a Kyuubi doll perched on top of his head, and murmuring to no one in particular, though everyone in the room heard it. If Konoha hadn't been so stupid as to throw me away like trash, I might have decided to protect them. PFFT. Humans. They're so stupid and easily swayed by their emotions. If my parents were still alive, I'd kill them for believing I'd be heralded as a savior. Idiots. When he saw the amethyst eyes staring at him when he mentioned he wouldn't protect Konoha, Kabuto's nervousness vanished. He pondered a little on how he was so easily discovered before giving a mental shrug. He didn't care as long as Orochimaru-sama wasn't forced to fight this one. Ibiki chose this moment to barge into the room, yelling to the eerily silent room, "Toss it down and shut up." And when no one seemed to heed his order, he realized they were all staring at Naruto, and he cast a curious glance at the blonde. Sensing that many eyes were on him, Naruto picked up the plush doll from his head and tossed it to the front of the class before enlarging it to the point where its head was just barely grazing the ceiling with its head. The doll took this time to bellow out a roar of "sit the fuck down" before disappearing, reappearing on top of Naruto's head in his smaller form once more. Many in the room believed it was an illusion cast by Ibiki and heeded it, but Ibiki and Kabuto realized it was the actual doll that did it and filed it away in their minds for later. The actual exam was rather interesting, in that Naruto was able to stare directly at the exam proctor, Morino Ibiki, for 40 minutes without blinking. The proctor was actually freaked out by the flat gaze directed at him, and was fidgeting nervously. The final 5 minutes before the 10th question, the black mage shifted his gaze towards the ceiling, appearing to be deep in thought about something. Naruto probed the construct to figure out its shape to determine the correct answers from the 2 Chunin that were hidden within the Chunin hopefuls, and he copied them onto his paper. After finishing the paper up to the 10th question, which he was still waiting on, the blonde sat back in his seat and proceeded to have another stare down with Ibiki, this time with a touch of killing intent, not enough to be noticed as such but enough to add an uncomfortable pressure to it. Ibiki noticed the slight pressure and assumed it was from one of the irritated students, so he shrugged it off. 5 minutes later, he dished out the 10th question, going through his well-rehearsed routine of if you take the question and fail, nobody in your team will ever be Chunin. If you refuse to take the question, better luck in 6 months. Sekura raised her hand to forfeit her team, but her plan was quickly derailed when she looked at Sasuke and was enraptured by his beauty, her hand still halfway raised. When the proctor realized that no one was going to forfeit after the first dozen or so teams, He delivered the most shocking news of their young lives, at least for the majority of them. The stunned silence was broken by a shriek that sounded like a cat with a trumpet halfway down its throat. "Do you mean we all pass?" Unfortunately, Sakura's question was never answered as a ball of black cloth shattered the window. Naruto used this opportunity to vent his annoyance towards his parasitic teammate, and flooded his killing intent, releasing a third of the potential throughout the room. The Kyuubi assisted in this endeavor by sending a highly concentrated beam of killing intent towards Ibiki, making it appear as if Naruto did it. The entire room fainted instantly, with most having heart palpitations from the intense fear of death, and many weak-hearted people experienced something akin to seeing their own deaths portrayed, their imaginations sparked by the intense amount of fear. The black ball of cloth exploded outwards, becoming a banner with each corner of the cloth pegged to the room by kunai, and a rather interesting statement of the sexy and single Mitarashi Anko is here as second exam proctor spelled out across it, with a woman landing gracefully on her feet in front of it. The woman was clothed in what could possibly make a prostitute blush at the skin showed. Several images of the possibilities of connecting the trench coat lining to nipple piercings later, and a mumbled debate with the plush doll on the possibilities of superglue later. And the woman finally noticed that everyone was out cold except for a single blonde teen in the middle of a room of assorted people shivering in fear. And she broke out into the single most terrifying grin ever. He couldn't get away before she latched onto his arm, grinding her chest suggestively against him and purring into his ear. I've never seen anyone force the entire first exam to faint. How the fuck did you get Ibiki as well, brat? The blonde turned his unnerving gaze towards her and leveled a glare that sent chills down Itachi's spine, believing someone was outdoing his Uchiha death glare. When electricity began to spark around his body, she quickly backed off before she was targeted with a very painful bolt. They are frail. I was not forced to release more than 1/3 of my killing intent, which was a lot for most people. Where will the second task take place? Anko flinched a little at the tone of his voice, her mask dropping for a second to cast an apologetic glance towards him. Her mask slipped back on before anyone could notice, though both the blonde and the doll saw the glance and ignored it. 10,000 or so detractors. Regrettably, less than 10. As soon as the teens were able to think clearly after their rude awakening, Anko yelled at them all that she was going to cut them in half in the next exam and that they should meet her at the Forest of Death at 2 p.m. the next day. 1:59 p.m. the next day. Fearing for his virginity, Naruto had teleported to the forest's entrance at exactly 1:59 p.m., leaving Anko with no time to try to force herself on him before the exam. Unfortunately, it appeared that she was planning on doing just that, as she pouted petulantly at him when she saw him, giving a rather convincing version of the kicked puppy look. A puppy was kicked by a scantily dressed man, featuring boobs. Nonetheless, she began the second task by announcing that killing was legal and forcing all candidates to sign waivers so that Konoha couldn't be held accountable for their deaths, which caused Naruto's lips to quirk upward and the doll on his head to give a feral grin, though nobody noticed. Naruto strode between the two, not paying attention to either of them as he considered what he could do with 5 days of free reign within the Forest of Death. Unfortunately, other Konoha nins had the same thought, and they were horrified. A distinct scent reached Naruto's nose, and he blinked rapidly in shock and mild disgust. Smells like snakes and little boys. I had no idea such a thing existed. The black mage relayed this intriguing information to his doll, causing the poor plush toy to burst out in hysterical fits of giggles, though he would later deny doing something as unmanly as giggling. The snake Sanin, Orochimaru, has an interest. It appears to be in the bodies of boys. He claims to need a new body every 3 years, but I believe he is simply afraid of commitment. Naruto couldn't help but snort in amusement, causing both Sasuke to spin around and stare in stunned silence. The blonde waltzed past them, leaning against a tree right next to their gate as he waited for the horn to sound, signaling the start of the next exam. He watched as Anko threw a kunai to graze the cheek of Kiba, who was drawing too much attention to himself, and her subsequent shunshin behind him to lick up the blood. Indeed, it appears that one of Orochimaru's quirks, which could be a body augmentation, was his tongue, which seemed to be able to extend indefinitely. The blonde immediately squashed that thought with the mental equivalent of a boulder, never wanting to think about that tongue again. Thankfully, the gods took pity on him as the horn blared at that moment, and the black mage seemed to blur out of existence, disappearing into the forest without so much as a footprint in his wake. 21 teams in 5 days. This would be entertaining. Day 1 of the Forest of Death, 2:53 p.m. While training with Lulu, she taught him to follow the trails of energy left behind from any sort of usage, and given that ninjas tend to use chakra to augment their legs while running, it was like following a trail of footprints. He took out his heaven scroll and examined it, discovering that the scrolls were protected by a powerful barrier to prevent accidental damage when retrieving them from other teams. He snapped his fingers and let the mana flow without batting an eye, a whispered arrow breaking the silence of the glade. Whirling sickles of wind obliterated the entire team, and the black mage hopped down from his perch, picking up a duplicate heaven scroll from their remains before returning to the trees, leaving no trace of his presence in the clearing aside from 3 mangled corpses, together with Sakura and Sasuke. Sakura's shrieks of fear and squeals of Sasuke-kun were nearly broadcasting where they were, and she was nearly broadcasting where they were. She had to have been dropped on her overly large brow at a young age. Sasuke was doing alright. His extra training with Kakashi was paying off, but not enough after all. How powerful could one be if all they did was copy techniques? Perhaps they weren't doing so well because the rabbit that was attacking them wasn't dead, and both of them were low on chakra. It must be one of those evil mutant bunnies that can only be found in the Forest of Death. Day 1, 8:45 p.m. with Naruto. The Black Mage had followed the trail of another genin team, this time from Iwagakure, and had set up a few detection traps to ensure they weren't caught off guard. Unfortunately, this did not shield them from the explosion of flames in the center of the 3. The blonde hopped down and scavenged their blackened corpses, retrieving an earth scroll before vanishing in a whirlpool of water to escape the acrid stench of melted flesh. Day 1, 11:25 p.m. Truly, this has to be one of the few things Konoha gets right. 5 days of free-for-all, killing permitted. Naruto discovered an Aimgakure team and another Kirigakure team fighting in the midst of a battle. The Aim Nins were doing quite well, using their umbrellas loaded with senbon to rain down on the Kiri Nins who were hidden within a mist. After watching them fight for a while with no deaths, Naruto decided to up the casualty rate. The blonde decided to rest after liberating an earth and a heaven scroll from the remains of 6 victims of random lightning strikes, so he slipped into the branches of a tree, weaving a pattern with his mana to disguise himself as the tree itself so he could sleep undisturbed. There are 4 days left and 17 teams, together with Sasuke and Sakura. After fighting in a death match against the fluffy mutant bunny, the two decided to retire for the night, hiding among the shrubbery because Sakura didn't have any genjutsu, and Sasuke was too Uchiha to learn worthless illusions. Day 2, 6:25 am. Naruto decided to search for and destroy a few more teams after stretching a little to fully awaken. He tapped his chin lightly in thought, wondering if he should go after any Konoha teams, before shrugging it off. He couldn't care less. If they got in his way, they would die. If not, they would live. He dashed into the woods, deciding to show no mercy if he came up against a Konoha genin. Using exam proctors, several Jounin senseis were also sitting up with Anko, Genma, Hayate, and Ibiki on the top of the tower in the middle of the Forest of Death, and quite a few had questioned Anko's sanity when she brought something up with her. It was made of popcorn. A bag of popcorn large enough to last them all 5 days. When they asked what it was for, she laughed uncontrollably before saying, "You'll see." Many of them used their stealth training to move as far away from her as they could without drawing her attention. The purple-haired snake mistress shielded her brow from the sun as she searched the forest for something before they all apparently found it. A spear of ice the size of the tower itself fell from the sky, slamming into the ground in the forest and shattering into tiny pieces before evaporating, while everyone else was busy trying to pull their jaws off the ground and yelling "do it again." Over the course of 5 days, all available Konoha Jounin were stationed up there with her, watching the proceedings. Only a few Konoha Jounin knew what was causing it, while others had suspicions. Day 2 of the forest, 2:02 p.m. The Black Mage decided it was time to up the ante after giving a show to all the ninja currently watching the treetops and liberating yet another Earth Scroll from a poor Iwa team. He quickly followed the trail of 3 more converging teams to a large clearing where 2 teams were fighting against the third, which appeared to be Team 10. As he lifted a hand, a malicious smirk tugged at his lips. With Team 10, Shikamaru and Ino had immobilized 2 members of one team, while Chaoji knocked out the third and stole the scroll, which turned out to be the same one they had stolen from a team earlier in the morning. They threw down a smoke bomb to cover their tracks as they retreated with their prize, hoping to have better luck elsewhere. What they didn't expect was for the team they had stolen from to form an alliance with another team from their country, and track them down in order to reclaim the scroll. So here they were, in the midst of what could be called tactical suicide. Their group was definitely not meant for open battle. At this point in their ninja careers, they were leaning towards assassination, capture, interrogation. If they had more jutsu in their arsenal, maybe they would have had a chance. Against all odds, they weren't dead yet. Ino had 4 broken ribs, a cracked forearm, and some internal bleeding where one of the opposing nins had delivered a devastating heel drop to her abdomen. Shikamaru had a busted lip, a cut above his eyebrow from a kunai that would have impaled his temple if he hadn't leaned backwards at the last moment, and a few fractured bones in his wrist. Unfortunately, they were mostly unharmed, aside from 2 nins knocked out on the other alliance, and this would not end well. One of the nins with unattractive features walked up to Team 10 and sneered at them. HMPH, is this the fabled Ino Shika Cho trio? Pathetic. We were going to just knock you out and take the scroll, but now we'll have to kill you. Ino took a horrified breath before coughing bloodily, as the action wasn't helping her broken ribs. The sneering ninja was impaled through the 8 vital points by 8 frost javelins before any fatal blows could be thrown. The nin didn't know what hit him, his face forever holding an expression of horrified agony, eyes clouded over in death. The opposing team's other 3 conscious nins immediately whirled around to find out who had killed their leader, only to die in a variety of ways. A massive fist of rock broke free from the ground, wrapping around one and squeezing until his chest caved in before pulling it into the earth with it. A second was struck by arcing lightning bolts from multiple directions, which puzzled Shikamaru as to how the bolts moved horizontally. And the final one was the most brutal. Naruto strode out of the trees, both hands raised, fingers splayed, the air around him pulsing with power, though he appeared as apathetic as ever. Hundreds of thin tendrils of boiling hot water sprouted from the air, held together by mana to prevent them from evaporating from the intense heat. Team 10 watched in horrified fascination as the golden blonde swiped his hands around in an intricate pattern, the water following every gesture. Within seconds, the nin was nothing more than a pile of flayed flesh, and a blood stain on the soil, though the victim's screams of torment would haunt their dreams for many da. The 2 nins who were unconscious were buried alive. This seemed to be the tipping point for Yamanaka Ino, who turned around and vomited, though it was bloody from her internal injuries and did nothing to alleviate her nausea. Shikamaru and Chaoji appeared to be caught between intense terror and disgust at how the enemy was dispatched, and neither could even hope to speak because they were too shocked by the deaths they witnessed. Naruto glided silently towards them, the Kyuubi doll in one arm, using his other hand to seal the scroll within another scroll before placing the sealing scroll within one of his pockets. The 2 male team members recoiled from the blonde as he walked towards them, though the action caused them both to flinch in pain. The jewel-eyed blonde approached their female teammate, drew her around, and backhanded her across the face in one motion, causing all 3 of them to blink stupidly, their jaws dropping at the action. Gaining her composure, Yamanaka winced as she touched the side of her face, knowing that a bruise would be left behind. She looked up at who had hit her, almost screaming in terror at who it was, but the black mage did something that made the other 2 members of Team 10 gape in confusion. He reached down and tilted her head up so she could look him in the eyes, his cold demeanor slightly lifting. I do not regret my actions, but I am sorry that you were forced to witness them. Allow this to serve as a lesson to you that the life of a shinobi is not to be taken lightly. You would have all died if I hadn't come. While my actions are admittedly brutal, they are the reality of the ninja world. If you can't handle it, you should leave right away. If you need help coming to terms with this, you should talk to Yamanaka Inoichi, who should be able to help you. He turned to leave, but the Mindwalker blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Why didn't you kill us as well? The purple-eyed teen turned to look over his shoulder, the side of his lips twitching slightly in response to the question. While Konoha may believe I am a demon, they must learn an important lesson. The world is never black and white, only shades of gray exist. They must understand that demons are not pure evil, and humans are not pure good. It should have been ingrained in them already as a result of the Shinobi Wars, but they developed this strange self-righteous streak, believing themselves to be good while everyone else is evil. Chaoji still didn't get it and said so, while the other blonde's jaw almost dislocated itself as her skewed vision of the world abruptly shattered, and the black mage turned towards him and lifted one eyebrow before elaborating. Think about it this way. What if the Kyuubi attacked because, say, Konoha shinobi murdered its family in cold blood? The Kyuubi would be correct, but Konoha labels it as an avatar of evil without ever questioning why. The villagers' treatment of me as a child would be considered evil in almost every other country, yet they felt they were in the right and were doing the right thing. I am neither good nor evil in any way. I am not who I imagine myself to be. I am not who others perceive me to be. I am who I believe others perceive me to be. Shikamaru will no doubt explain it to you later. I currently have less than 10 teams to eliminate, and I have less than 3 days to do so. Head northeast to the tower to get your injuries treated. He vanished into an air cyclone after his monologue ended. Team 10 had a lot to think about in the coming days, along with Anko and the others. It was the end of the 4th day, which meant the teams had exactly until noon the next day to get to the tower or be disqualified. So far, they had seen huge bolts of lightning exploding from a cloudless sky, the likes of which couldn't even hope to be matched by storms in Kumo. They also witnessed what could only be described as the love child of a tsunami, and a tornado, which appeared to be a towering column of water that spun into a maelstrom of torn trees, as well as quite a bit of blood, if the red spots in parts of the behemoth were any indication. The odd construction collapsed into itself after a few minutes, causing sighs of relief from those watching it. The strangest occurrence, however, occurred around midnight at the start of the final day. It's a squirrel, a colossal squirrel towering over the trees of the forest of death made entirely of controlled flame, picking up ninjas in its cute claws and chomping on them, with a long-haired golden blonde rider perched atop the tip of one of its ears. A piercing scream echoed over the trees, scattering any remaining birds that had tried to brave the flaming squirrel. It sounded like rusted senbon on a chalkboard, or perhaps a certain Haruno. The rider looked towards the sound before urging the molten flame behemoth towards it, not seeming fazed or uneasy about riding an entity made entirely of fire. Anko and the rest of the Jounin stared at the squirrel's retreating trail of smoke, many of them wondering how the trees didn't catch fire. The stunned silence at the event, which had never been done before in the history of the shinobi countries, was broken by a certain snake mistress, who was staring almost uncomfortably at the back of the flame squirrel, her popcorn forgotten. I'd love to have his child. With Naruto. The golden-haired teen in question had jumped off his creation as soon as he got close to the source of the banshee scream, and as he came through the trees, he witnessed what he was certain would be the best scene of his life thus far. If the yellow-eyed gaze with snake-like pupils was any indication, Orochimaru had given Uchiha Sasuke a cursed hickey, and his never-ending tongue was slurping up either side of the Uchiha heir's face, who looked absolutely horrified, yet unable to move from the pain of the evil bite mark. Sekiro was staring at it. It took all of his self-control not to burst out laughing, so he decided to drive off the Sannin and take his team to the tower so he could sleep. He tried hard to ignore the Sannin's claims that Sasuke would come to him for power, and something else, he had declared with a disturbing wink. A hail of fireballs and water bullets drove off the Sannin, who mistakenly thought it was a squad or two of a NBU. Jumping down from the trees once he was certain the snake pervert was gone, Naruto quickly knocked out his two teammates and dashed towards the tower, his two teammates being carried on slabs of earth for a variety of reasons. He didn't want to touch the snake's slobber, and he didn't want to be burdened with their dead weight. Pre-dawn at the tower, the flaxen-haired teen whipped out all 10 scrolls he had, summoning 5 different jounin in a large puff of smoke without even looking at the poster-like scroll on the wall. Uruka, Anko, Ibiki, Hayate, and Genma happened to be in the group. The 5 stood there in stunned silence for a moment, taking in the state of Team 7 before Uruka, Hayate, and Genma all jumped backwards to avoid them. Sekiro was muddied and mussed up, her hair a mess, and she had a few splotches of dried blood on her clothing. Sasuke had the snake hickey. He smelled of snake saliva. He was missing his shirt, and it appeared as if his pants were being ripped off, and many nins shuddered at the prospect of his condition. Naruto looked as pristine as ever, though he was covered in dried blood from his shins down to his bare feet, as if he had waded through blood. His hair, Anko noted, was as perfect as ever, and the Kyuubi doll's eyes were closed for once, which confused the nins to no end. The plush doll was currently concentrating all of his considerable willpower on imprinting the scene they had discovered Sasuke in his mind. He never wanted to forget how his prayers had been answered to make the Uchiha feel irrevocably violated, and the prick's face as the snake pervert licked him. Finally recognizing that their Uchiha heir required medical attention, Genma spat out his senbon, dashed forward with his sickly swordsman friend Hayate, and gently lifted the Uchiha off of the slab of earth that fell to the ground with a dull thud after its passenger was taken, while Uruka, realizing one of his former students also required medical attention, took Sekiro while the slab of earth carrying her fell to the ground shortly after. Anko and Ibiki walked forward in unison, knelt before the black mage, and spoke simultaneously. I want to be the mother of your children. If she bears your children, I want first dibs on her firstborn. For a brief moment, the blonde looked down at them, his lips twitching spasmodically, while the doll's eyes snapped open, and both jounin were treated to the once-in-a-lifetime experience of witnessing both the blonde and the plush toy burst out laughing. Naruto had a soft laugh that seemed to confuse the listener because it was equal parts sadism, malice, humor, and happiness. The doll was barking in laughter and rolling around in the blonde's arms, which would have startled the two if they weren't completely shell-shocked at the fact that Naruto, aka the demon child, was laughing. Neither of them would later remember the fox moving. Naruto finally spoke to the two after calming down, dashed their hopes. "I'm sorry, but I'd rather not have any children in this day and age. However, I believe I may be able to assist you." Both Jounin raised their hands in anticipation, clasping their hands together. "Because you both know better than to give in to the council, I have a proposal. You two are already in a relationship, correct?" Anko scratched the back of her head sheepishly while giggling nervously, mumbling something about how she thought nobody knew. Ibiki, on the other hand, simply nodded. He didn't care if anyone knew, because both he and Anko were irreplaceable, no matter how much the village despised Anko for training under Orochimaru when she was younger. Nobody could interrogate with better results than either Ibiki or Anko, so Naruto tapped his chin for a moment before nodding and responding with a half-smile to the two. "I will give you both a scroll to teach your children a general overview of how I fight. After they've learned the style, they'll have to make it their own. I suspect I won't be in Konoha for much longer, so I'll give them to you now, trusting that you won't give them to the council or share them. Consider it a clan secret. Unfortunately, you're both too old and entrenched in ninja ways to learn how I fight." Before either of them could figure out what they had just been given, the blonde rummaged through his pockets before unsealing a scroll easily the size of the forbidden scroll of seals and handing it to them. He quickly used a small ice needle and dropped a drop of both Anko's and Ibiki's blood on the scroll itself, before mumbling an incantation. The black mage began to walk away, calling behind him, "The scroll will only open for one of you or your descendants, and only if you willingly give your blood. It can only be handled and read by either of you or your descendants, and I've cursed your bloodlines as well. If any of your descendants attempt to reveal the scroll's secrets, they will perish as their souls are torn apart. If you wish, you can adopt children into your clan through a blood ritual inside that scroll, and they will be considered your descendants. This will keep my secrets safe while still passing on my legacy." When they recovered from their shock, the two torture and interrogation journalists would squeal like fans and glomp each other in ecstatic joy at the news. Naruto, tired from all the spells he had cast in the forest, stumbled into one of the rooms reserved for Chunin examinees, locked and warded the door, and fell into bed, cradling the Kyuubi doll to him as he fell asleep. 11:30 a.m. Naruto slipped into the shower after enough rest to wash off all the blood and grime from 5 days in the Forest of Death. He would have done so the night before, but it wasn't his bed, so he didn't care if he got blood in it. He had a feeling today would be eventful, to say the least. Tower Arena. Kabuto was having a bad day. Absolutely not. It all started in the morning when he fell out of bed, and the hot water ran out. And now Orochimaru-sama wanted him to continue competing in order to learn more about the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Orochimaru apparently didn't believe the blonde could not be a Jinchuriki. Oh well, at least he had rigged the random matches so that he would only face Naruto. He was interrupted in his thoughts about how bad the day was going to be when a thin sheet of ice appeared out of thin air next to him, containing the face of the blonde in question. He was becoming increasingly alarmed. He knew he was fucked when the blonde walked out of the sheet of ice. When the blonde appeared through the mirror, a few of the contestants flinched violently, while Uchiha Sasuke simply glared at him for taking the spotlight. He appeared to be some sort of model, with a Kyuubi doll atop his head and knee-length blonde hair swaying behind him in the breeze. But the murderous glint in his eyes shattered that notion. It was at this point that Kabuto began to pray. Sasuke was able to use a plagiarized version of the Goken fighting style that he had copied from Lee after finally figuring out what the glowy hand thing that Yoroi was using, creating the Shishi Renden. Asuma, Kurenai, and Guy could hear Naruto's murmur of like teacher, like student, so Kurenai turned her red gaze towards him and quirked an eyebrow, motioning for him to continue. The blonde turned to face her and replied simply, his fingers scratching behind the fox plush in his arms. Few understand what the Sharingan is truly intended to be. It's a terrible crutch for those two, they rely far too much on it. Itachi, on the other hand, only uses it as one should, as any other ninja tool, such as a kunai. He trains and can fight without his eyes if necessary. Guy-san, I'm sorry that the Uchiha ruined your students' hard work. The three Jounin were stunned by the analysis of Konoha's prized Daojutsu, and couldn't help but agree. They returned to the matches to continue watching, though they were quite boring. causing Naruto to zone out during most of them until one in particular. Naruto had tuned out Sakura and Ino's grudge match, up until the point where Ino cut off most of her hair, using the strands to try to entrap her opponent so that she could possess her. But the possession was thrown off by Sakura's split personality, forcing the Yamanaka back into her own body. After finishing the short seal chain, Ino had an experience that she later described as "I wasn't sure what I was doing or saying, it was instinct." Meijin Jikagu Fukeikan is a Japanese manga series. Sakura paled dramatically in the arena, letting out a blood-curdling scream before collapsing to the ground, unconscious and shaking. Ino let go of the technique, somewhat stunned by what she had just done. Before a slight tingling made its way to her mind to let her know what the illusion did, she realized she had used the rather traumatizing event in the forest as the illusion, forcing Sakura to believe she was the one who was impaled with ice spears, crushed by a rock hand, electrocuted by lightning, and finally flayed with water whips. When the realization hit her full force, she paled to an almost Orochimaru shade of white and dashed to her sensei, barely realizing she had made it to the next round before breaking down crying next to Asuma. He turned to Naruto and quirked an eyebrow, silently asking what the hell she was talking about that would scare her that much. Said blonde was rather amused by this turn of events, and gave out a slight chuckle before responding. Apparently, she used a genjutsu that forced Sakura to go through what I went through to save her team in the forest. I believe that would be squeezing her chest in a rock fist until the chest cavity collapses, then impaling her in all 8 vital points with ice spikes, electrocuting her with arcing lightning bolts, and flaying into a pile of flesh and blood with hair-thin strands of water. Kurenai and Guy, who were eavesdropping, gasped in shock and slight disgust at the brutality of it, before looking down at the poor blonde who was still crying on the ground, holding her knees to her chest. Kurenai absently noted to herself that maybe this would break Ino of her fangirl nature, and allow her to be a competent ninja, judging by the genjutsu she used. The black mage returned to the matches, realizing there were only 3 left, so he would be paired with one of the following: Hyuga Hinata, Hyuga Neji, Yakashi Kabuto, Sabaku no Gaara, or Rock Lee. He was hoping to go against Gaara to see how a Jinchuriki's power would fare against him, but he wouldn't mind letting others have a go with the homicidal. He looked up at the board, realizing he was up against Yakashi Kabuto, and let a malicious smirk tug at the corners of his lips. This was just too good to be true. He assumed the genin must have rigged the fight so that Orochimaru could spy on him, so might as well put on a show for him. He burst out laughing, leaving 2 snake using jounin in reverent awe as well as respect, and most of the Konoha spectators pale with fear. Deciding to go for shock value, he teleported with an elaborate whirlwind of miniature ice mirrors, and the Saiyanin had to shove his tongue back into his mouth to prevent salivating. Kabuto was sweating profusely and shaking slightly as he stood a good distance away from the blonde, waiting for the proctor to call out Hajime. As soon as the proctor called out Hajime, he activated his chakra no Mesu, intending to cripple his opponent before he died. His opponent, on the other hand, simply stood there, his smile growing wider by the second. While Kabuto was unaware, the rest of the audience saw crystals of ice appear all over the arena, multiplying at an incredible rate every second that Naruto appeared to be doing nothing. As Kabuto leapt forward to try to end the match quickly, the blonde tossed his doll into the air, lifting both hands as a violet aura sprung to life around him. The majority of the audience was impressed by the aura, though ninjas could feel no chakra coming from it. All of the ice crystals buried themselves underground as his hands slammed downward, coincidentally at the same time that the doll hit the ground. A single sentence was said before the scene descended into chaos, with Kabuto still in the air from his leap. Hayuten, Jigoku no Tauketsu Surumori. Hundreds of thousands of ice spears appeared from beneath the arena, branching off multiple times as they grew to a height of 30 feet, ending just below the area the spectators were watching from. In the space of less than a second, the arena was literally transformed into a frozen forest, with Kabuto jumping from one spear to the other, trying to avoid being impaled on one of the forest's many millions of branches and twigs. The audience witnessed what happened next, as they all saw reflections of Naruto in every single branch and twig of the forest, the feral smile on his lips. For only a few seconds, he disappeared. In those few seconds, the most blood-chilling scream of agony was heard throughout the village, causing all the spectators to get a chill down their spines. Team 10 were the only ones who knew exactly what caused it, and all 3 of them spoke at the same time to their jounin sensei while they waited for the forest to melt. Kabuto-san is dead. Asuma turned to his 3 students, while the other jounin eavesdropped, wondering how a genin team knew what had happened. How do you know? Shikamaru spoke up because Ino was having flashbacks and Chaoji was trying to forget the memory by eating. His voice lacked its usual drawl and faltered slightly as he, too, remembered what happened the last time anyone heard that sound. The last time we heard that scream was when Naruto flayed a ninja alive in the forest. Before he dragged it underground, all that was left of him was a pile of flesh and a bloodstain. The only way to make that sound is to die an excruciating death, screaming out your last moments. The forest had finally finished melting, with the water suspended in the air in multiple tennis ball-sized balls to keep the floor from slipping. In the center of the ring, surrounded by holes from the roots of the trees as well as several 100,000 sharp objects of varying elements, were two figures, Naruto, covered head to toe in blood, and he seemed to be slightly amused at something. And the second figure was a bloodied mess of skin. Regenerative abilities. I was certain I had also killed you with that. The bloodied mess seemed to gurgle a little, still clearly alive, though not by much. The proctor was about to end the match when a mass of earth, rock, and concrete sprung to life next to Naruto, molding itself into a vaguely humanoid shape. The figure wrapped both its arms around the massive kabuto, giving off several sickly crunch sounds as it hugged it, before pulling it down underground with it. I believe I've won because I eliminated my opponent, correct? Genma nodded dumbly, still in shock at the horrific scene, before calling a 10-minute intermission to fix the arena due to all the holes marring the ground, making it look like Swiss cheese. As Naruto exited, several of the globules of water surrounded him in a large globe of water, which quickly changed from a sky blue color to a deep red as Naruto exited it, devoid of all blood on his person. After the intermission, the last two matches were quite boring in comparison to the rest. Hinata was pummeled by her cousin Neji, and she didn't think ahead enough to use the seal on his forehead against him. She lost, Neji won, and she was sent to the emergency room to make sure her organs were okay after the one-sided fight. Gaara and Lee's fight was unusual. Gaara stood still, his sand attacking for him, while Lee bounced around off the walls, attempting to kick through the Suna no Yoroi. He was eventually forced to use 5 of the celestial gates in an attempt to win, but Gaara softened the blow with his sand, allowing him to live despite being severely injured. Lee was unconscious due to the pain, his body having undergone far too much strain from. As the Jinchuriki went for the kill on a knocked-out opponent, Naruto used the remaining globes of water to encapsulate Lee's limp body, cushioning it from any jarring as a wave of intense flame devoured the sand, crystallizing it into glass. Many Konoha residents were surprised that the demon was showing compassion, despite his apathetic face. He hopped down from the viewer's deck to the water globe, leaving Lee's head unguarded due to suffocation concerns, and lifted the body from the ground, forcing it to hover behind him as he turned to Gaara and spoke. I may not be very compassionate, but I do have a sense of honor. Even though your opponent was knocked out and unable to defend himself, you attempted to assassinate him, despite the fact that the proctor would have declared you the winner. My match was an exception. The opponent could regenerate from fatal wounds and would have been on his feet and ready to fight me again in under 3 minutes. He then turned and began to inspect Lee's body for any serious injuries before nodding and jumping back up to the viewer's deck, the globe of water following him through the air, and cracked a slight smile at Guy. He'll be fine. All he needs is a week or so of rest. The water is absorbing any movement that would jar his overworked body. It would be prudent to accompany me to the hospital following the exams, as I doubt they would be able to assist me in any way. With that done, all the contestants were called back into the arena to draw numbers for the final matches in 1 month. The matches ended up as Yamanaka Ino vs Nara Shikamaru, Uchiha Sasuke vs Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto, Sabaku no Kankuro vs Sabaku no Temari, Sabaku no Gaara vs Hyuga Neji, Inuzuka Kiba vs Aburame Shino. With the Lee bubble in front of them, Naruto and Guy headed off to the hospital. Naruto was contemplating what to do with the month they were given, and decided he might as well ask Yamato for a tip on Mokuton, seeing as his ice manipulation seemed pretty damn close to finished. The Kyuubi on his shoulder was thinking about what his charge could do with the element of wood and how he could use it against the Uchiha in the finals. The possibilities are endless.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.